Our next session is a panel on providing solutions. So we looked at strategies during the last session. We're going to actually talk about some possible solutions that may come from the industry on the panel or from the government on the panel. We've got a mix of operational leaders and industry partners to discuss the current and projected mission command restraints and issues, both from a challenge and a solutions perspective. You know, moderating the panel today is not a stranger to this crowd this week, or this last couple of days, Colonel Nora Marcos. Colonel Marcos joined the Army in 1990 and has commanded at the tactical, operational, and strategic levels. Her command assignments include serving as a senior Army signal officer, coordinating support for the U.S. Army in Japan with bilateral relations with the Japanese signal and cyber forces. That should have been interesting. She also served as the commander of the DISA-CONUS and the responsibility of provisioning, managing, defending the DoDA network. Again, no small task in a critical area. She currently serves as the division chief for Force Development, Mission Command Division, headquarters G8. And in this role, which I think all of you know, she's been instrumental in formulating the planning and support of the Mission Command Center of Excellence. So I think with her background and experience and the panel that she has right now, we're off to a running start. Welcome.
Thanks, Mike. And before I begin, I want to make sure everybody's awake. Pretty effective, huh? I don't say is it work. I just bang it. All right. So I want to thank General Shea and General Woods, as well as Mike Warlick and the AFCEA staff that's outside. They always do such a great job. I appreciate you all, especially thanks to our industry partners for being here, not only providing support to us, but bringing great questions as well as solutions. And Major General Mingus for spearheading this event. I'll tell you, from my foxhole, it's been refreshing and rewarding to see the collegiality, if that's the word, and if it's not, it should be, among the general officers. From the time General Mingus and General Morrison got to their positions, it was a G3, G6 relationship. Toss on that General Gallagher from the Aons, now the CFT. As he's already mentioned, Gary Martin and General Bassett. And also we have here from RKIC is General Komar, who spearheads the finish, putting the ball over the finish line on those requirements. So we appreciate you being here too, sir. So I started this job 2 years ago, and in this job, I asked myself, what's my mission going to be? And my mission is to provide the best possible network to enable my son to execute mission command. Well, he's 13 years old, so we have time, but some gentlemen up here have their sons and daughters, literally or figuratively, that need and deserve that network. So, you know, we talked about fielding yesterday's technology for the next so many years, and that's a product of decisions that we make from a resourcing perspective. So I briefed the CSA a year and a half ago, and I asked him, do you want to keep fielding these radios till 2050, or do we want to field 6? And the question, 6 brigade combat teams. Well, why not more? Because the force has a finite amount of bandwidth that we can field at any given time. And then there's those that say the network is broken, and I am not one of those that say the network is broken. It has done what we have asked it to do. It meets the requirements that we laid forth, but as we all agree, it's not optimal for the future fight, and that's what we need to get to. So our mission here today, my mission is to moderate a discussion among operational and industry leaders on current and projected mission command challenges and constraints and issues to provide those. So the first person we have here, it's truly an honor to have him here, Major General Joseph Martin, who drove up from Fort Riley. He is the commander of the 1st Infantry Division. He commanded a company and a brigade as well as a division in the 1st Infantry Division in combat, and he commanded a battalion from the 4th Infantry Division. He recently redeployed in July. So, sir, I want to turn it over to you for your comments, thinking from a perspective of what are your soldiers' needs?
Well, thanks for this opportunity to address this crowd on this very, very important subject. be careful about these mics are very sensitive. So I'm going to give you just a little bit of history to tell you and try to give you a view of where we're at, I think, as a division commander. I am not a technophile. I don't spend a lot of time trying to learn exactly what drives the network, but there's a reason for that. So as Nora talked to you about, I've had I guess it's a fairly unique opportunity, but in this day and age, maybe not so much anymore, to command at every level of command in combat. In Desert Storm, we had maps and a brand new out of the depot VRC-12 radio that 50 kilometers line of sight in the Saudi Arabian desert, and that was mission command. And I knew exactly how to operate that radio. I knew exactly how I would use a common operating picture within the company using those maps and then articulating various words on the radio. It was pretty simple. Commanded a tank battalion in 4th ID in Operation Iraqi Freedom. We had FBCB2, the EPARS-based network, and I will tell you that as a battalion commander, I was infinitely familiar with exactly how that system worked. We laid out rules and governance as to how we're going to use that network, and we leveraged it as a very game-changing capability, in my personal opinion, and it was very reliable. We didn't have a lot of FSRs helping us out. They didn't come to visit us in Baku by Iraq, but nevertheless, we kept that network up the entire year, and we were very happy with the product we had. Fast forward to Desert Storm, Operation Iraqi Freedom, Northwest Baghdad with the 2nd Brigade of the 1st ID, and that's when we had the full suite of systems, and actually it was a very reliable network there as well. CPOF was the mission command tool of choice, but we had all the other enablers from the various warfighting functions available to us as well. And it was stable because we had it inside of buildings. We had servers that were set in place. We fell in on a data set and a storage capability that was protected, cooled, heated. It was a very stable environment, and so that network was very reliable as well. And then we had BFT that we used to maneuver around within the OE. Fast forward to Operation Iraqi Freedom as the division commander, Operation Inherent Resolve as the division commander. When we were distributed across Iraq at 7 major different locations, once again, using a network that allowed us to see ourselves and to communicate to each other so that we could conduct our mission as a partner to the Iraqi forces, enabling their success. Recently, I had the opportunity to participate in a warfighter exercise as a division commander, and I will tell you that the network we have does work. We stood up a 100% expeditionary, tactical, no-fiber network with a WinT Inc. 2 network at the division headquarters recently fielded, and then throughout the rest of the subordinate headquarters, they had WinT Inc. 1. And that network worked, but it took a significant amount of work to stand it up, and it took a significant amount of work to maintain it. But once we did, it was very reliable. And as the division commander, I was very pleased with how consistent that network and how reliable it was for us. There were parts in that network, probably capabilities inherent in that network at the user level for your average warfighter that were questionable, but overall the network delivered exactly what it was supposed to deliver. I can't tell you exactly how that network worked because it took a fleet of G6 soldiers and S6 soldiers at Echelon to maintain that network. And the proficiency of those soldiers was varied, not because they're incompetent, but because soldiers in our formations continue to rotate out. And so it brings into question the the intuitive nature of the equipment that makes up that network, and the trainability of that. You know, you go through these nets for these systems, and you've got a fleet of soldiers present, and as we switch out 3 to 6% of our formation every month, new soldiers come in, soldiers that were previously trained go out, and so it's incumbent upon the unit then to sustain the proficiency of its organization. And that is a challenge that's easier said, or an accomplishment that's easier said than done. And so the intuitive nature of the equipment, the intuitive nature of the network, the intuitive nature of the enablers that are associated with that network is very important, because all you want soldiers to do when they're in harm's way fighting the enemy is fight. You don't want them fighting themselves, and so they've got to become proficient with the equipment that they have. If you were to ask me what I want for a network, I would tell you that I'd want a network that's survivable. And for it to be survivable, it's got to be able to be defended and protected from the various threats that exist in a multi-domain battlefield. Once again, that's a great challenge, and it becomes greater each and every day. I want it sustainable. When we were in Operation Inherent Resolve, we had several components, particularly in our satellite systems, that could not weather the Iraqi summer temperatures. And so these parts, power amplifiers and parts like that in our satellite terminals, would overheat and fail, and then it took a while for the enterprise to find a replacement for those systems. Keeping those systems up is important, and so that network has to be sustainable. It's got to be protected. It's got to be protected by the software that we have, the hardware that we have, and also the capabilities of the soldiers we have in our formations. We do have some soldiers with our 255 Sierras and 25 Deltas that are organic to our formation now, but there's just a couple at the division level. And there's MTO slots for them to be elsewhere, but that's a capability that we're growing in the Army. But we have seen already that they're absolutely invaluable to our formation with the tools that they have and the tools that they've trained on. I need it to be interoperable. You know, we've got NIPR and we've got SIPR, but the fact of the matter is we don't know who we're going to be fighting against. We don't know who we're going to be fighting with. And along with who we're going to be fighting with is probably going to require that we have a tertiary network that we're operating with our coalition partners on. Well, within the 1st Infantry Division right now, I've got a stack for NIPR, I've got a stack for SIPR. I have to make up my own stack if I'm going to have a multinational partner network. And we can, you know, buy a new stack, or we can take one that we intended to turn in, reprogram it, and use that. But we need that tertiary stack if we're going to be a multinational partner-based organization that can interoperate with our multinational partner. Standards-based. Why would a knuckle-dragging tanker be talking about standards-based? I'll tell you this is why. Because too often I've seen, even at my level of understanding, where we've got a part or a system that goes down, and there's not something we can take off the shelf and replace it. We have to go back to that niche provider or that niche capability to replace that particular part of the system. I think our future system needs to be more standards-based so that we can grow it over time as the threats in the operating environment evolve and as our own requirements evolve over time. You think about the simple one, the M1 tank. When it was launched back in the late 70s, it did not look like the M1A2 SEP did, but it was a vision of the M1A2 SEP from the very beginning. I've seen the history on this, okay? Someone saw that. And so what does our network look like with that so that we know where we're going to be way in the future, understanding we don't have the technology or the capability or the fielded equipment now? How do we get to that end state over time, but never lose the view of what that end state should be based on our view of the future? And then the last thing is highly mobile. We're very proud as a division headquarters because we were able to get down to 12 hours and 40 minutes. Time to break down, time to set up, plus movement time. You know, longer the movement time, the longer the time would be. But 12 hours and 40 minutes of takedown and setup time to set up the facilities we needed in the main command post to be able to provide the mission command systems that we needed to execute operations in the division command post. That's too long. It's got to be shorter than that. But the requirement to collaborate will still exist, the requirement to communicate will still exist, and the requirement to be able to interact as a staff will still exist. And so how do you do that with a new, improved network? I'm sorry I've gone a bit long, but that's my perspective as a division commander. And if I did not, in speaking, answer one of your questions, I'll be happy to do that after we've gone through everybody else.
All right, thank you, sir. Next, we have Major General Retired Jeff Smith, who has 30 years of leadership experience, concluding with Deputy Commander of the 18th Airborne Corps and multiple command assignments within the 82nd, 101st, and 10th Mountain Division. Right now, he is the Vice President for Global Business Development with Harris Corporation. Sir, I leave it to your comments, but one thing I would like you to touch upon is any challenges of policy and governance that you think need to be overcome so you can provide our children the network they deserve.
Well, great, thanks. And I want to thank AFCEA for putting this event together, and of course, General Mingus for bringing the military and the government with industry together. I sit next to General Martin here and reflect back to Desert Shield, Desert Storm as he was iterating his experience. And we probably could have been sitting here in 1991 having the same discussion, but at a much different scale and a much different level. I think as an infantry company commander in the 101st during Desert Shield, Desert Storm, the most technological thing we had in the company and in the battalion at that time, and it was delivered to us as we were about ready to air assault deep into Iraq, was a plugger. And I think that plugger was handed to every fire support officer in every company and into every aviation flight lead. And that was the way we navigated across the border on an air assault. When we hit the ground, it was PRC-77 and a long whip antenna is what I had on my back and in my RTO's hand. And you look forward and you look at all the incremental and evolution of technology and of the way we operate from 1991 until present, as General Martin just alluded to. It's quite amazing on what we are able to do as a team partnered with industry and U.S. military. And I am one of those fathers that has a son that's in the military, and there's a lot of passion up here, a lot of passion in the audience. And one of the things I would convey to folks, and I'm not too far removed from taking the uniform off myself, and I think all of our industry partners here would say the same thing, is there's a lot of passion in industry about this business. Not necessarily for the bottom line, but because it's the right thing to do for our nation, for our country, and for soldiers before they go into harm's way. And I remember former mentor and leader of mine that always said, we will never send a soldier into harm's way improperly trained, improperly led, or improperly equipped. And I think we've got the first two down in spades almost every time we've deployed. It's the last one, are they properly equipped to be able to fight in the environment that we are putting them, is something that collectively we have to work on in our partnership. And I will just start off with my comments. It really, in some respect, Nora, it does get to policy and guidance. There has to be a way in which we can come together and have greater insight into what the Army is thinking and what's on your mind. And this type of event is a way to do that. What we did last week at AOSA down in Huntsville, where leaders like General Gallagher and General Mingus, General Morrison, General Dave Bassett, coming together around to industry, sitting down with them, just in that small 15, 20-minute segments that they were doing that, offered insight and allowed some of the transparency to occur that isn't going to happen and doesn't happen when we all go back to our headquarters and our offices and get on with the day-to-day business. But we have to find ways to do more and more of that. And why do I say that? As somebody that just recently joined industry, I can tell you that industry has a lot of money to invest, but they want to invest it in the right way for the right issues and for the right requirements. And when you look at the internal research and development funds that industry applies, and I'll speak for my company, Harris Corporation, if you look at it year over year, where that money goes oftentimes is driven by strategy. It's driven by what we think is going to happen, anticipating what the requirements are going to be. But more importantly, and where we can come together, I think, and learn and help shape where that money goes is what gaps are you trying to fill? Have you clearly articulated and communicated the gaps that you're looking to fill? And this really gets below requirements, but unique, specific niche gaps that various companies within industry can focus their intellectual capacity in areas and use their own money to develop innovation. And I think the finer spear we can draw on that and learn from you, the better shaping will happen with our own IRAD money. And some companies spend a lot of money on innovation through their commercial business model that can be leveraged in many different ways if we have a better understanding of where to spend that money. And of course, as we all know, and we talked about it yesterday in the smaller group, that money is not endless. There has to be something on the backside of that at some point in time, or you shift it to some other place, either to other governmental programs or into the commercial market space, which could be a challenge for the military. But I think helping us anticipate, and then us helping you develop and shape the requirements iteratively, as some people over the course of today have said, what ways can we iteratively work with the government to get to the solutions, I think is something that we should take a hard look at. There's been a lot of discussion about how we make this happen. And I was commenting to somebody on the break about the visual that's going on right now in the Army from the top down. It's very clear and very obvious that the energy and the passion for solving this problem really does start at the Chief of Staff and really goes above that to Secretary of the Army, to the under, and on down, all the way through folks in this room. I'm talking in uniform and in the government service. How do you maintain that passion? How do you maintain that synergy? How do you maintain that priority over time when all these leaders are going to change out? In 3 years, they almost all will be gone, moved on to other jobs, at least in the military side. And how do you bridge that gap? How do you bridge that time? Because this problem set is not going to be solved this year. It's not going to be solved next year. It's going to be iteratively solved over many years. And the major concern I have is how do we bridge that? And I think one way, and you're really getting at it, is you got to build that coalition of people that really buy into this and internalize what's going on, that can carry the weight through leadership changes that are going to occur both in industry and on the government side. And having that mechanism by which you constantly build the coalition and bring the coalition along, I think is going to be very important to the success of delivering the end-state vision that you have on these charts that you've been briefing for a couple of days now. Everywhere that I've been in the last 60 days since joining the industry, I've seen key leaders of the Army saying the same message. That's really important. Over-communicate it. Continue to communicate it wherever you go, because it's got to sink in and we have to believe it before we're going to invest in it. And I think to the extent that you can do that, and back to the policy, and I know we look at the FAR rules and and various policy documents and guidance that's recently come out, I think the barriers have to come down, and we have to find ways to work more closely together so that we can constantly make sure we understand, as was said earlier today and yesterday, just the terminology can be confusing and the acronyms can be confusing, let alone whether we really understand what it is that you're saying. So I don't think you can say it enough is what I'm trying to communicate to you here in order to get industry on board to make sure that we can get after solving these it's not just one problem we're trying to solve, it's a menu of problems that we're trying to solve. And then one of the things that I think we have to take a look at is how do you empower below key executive level to take action and to iteratively get at some of these, what I call ankle biters or little chihuahuas biting around your ankle. How do you enable people at lower echelons of the organizations to actually solve the small problems and get after it with a sense of confidence? And then the last thing I'll close out with in terms of, and it may have been General Sorensen or maybe General Campbell up at the CIO G6 conference about a month ago, 3 weeks ago, in a small group that said you have to plan for and create small wins, because this is a major problem set. As General Lundy would say, this is a wicked problem. And when you have these kind of problems that are very complex, to maintain confidence and momentum, having a good, winnable, iterative win and build on that over time so that you can continue to build confidence, continue to build that coalition, I think is going to be very important to moving the needle forward on in all these areas. And the last thing is help industry work more collaboratively together. Each of us have our own business models. Each of us have partners and teammates that we come together on certain opportunities, but we may not see that opportunity. The military and the government talks to each of these companies, in some cases individually, separately. You understand kind of what they are doing, what their capabilities are. If you can somehow help us come together and bridge those barriers that exist between industry partners, perhaps we can come together in a way that can provide an integrated solution that we may not have come together on our own. And to the extent that you can do that, I think we will come to you much faster with solutions.
Thank you.
To that end.
Thank you for those comments. I appreciate it. Next, we have Colonel Derek Thompson from the 101st 1st Brigade. He is from Nebraska, and he was a 1995 graduate from West Point. So the good news is I didn't haze you. Not that I would have. And you didn't haze me either, sir. So not yet anyway. All right. So he has multiple deployments and special operations, as well as commanding, as a company commander of 5th Ranger Training in the 5th Ranger Training Battalion. Maybe we'll talk about training later. But the question to you is the question that I asked General Martin. What do your soldiers need?
Well, thanks, Nora, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I guess up front there were some earlier comments about some of our hairstyles. Let me just say it's coming back any day now. It's coming back, I'm sure it is. But again, I do appreciate being here. I appreciate AFCEA for hosting this and General Mingister for having me be a part of this. This is one of the main topics I've got in front of me as a brigade commander. I've been in this seat for about 8 months now. And a couple of things that stood out to me. The first one is that we have very, very capable and lethal squads, platoons, companies. They're very good. We have tremendous soldiers out there, very aggressive, very tough, fit, gritty soldiers who really know how to get the job done. But the second part of that is my big challenge is to make sure I'm synchronizing everything in the right time and space to equip them with what they need to be successful at that point in the battlefield, that I'm able to provide to them fires and cyber effects and information ops and other stuff, all at the right synchronized place and time at the battlefield and sustainment to all make that work. And so for me, mission command becomes the warfighting function that I clearly spend more time above all else as a commander on to make sure we get that right. Now, a lot of that's on us. A lot of that is, I think Jeff and I were talking, It's always a challenge. It's definitely an atrophy, something that atrophies quickly if you don't use it. And so we have a responsibility to make sure we are leaning into it, that we are working on it, that we're training for it, and if it's more complex than it was in the past, then we'll lean into it harder and make it work. So some of that's on us. But the other part of that is there are some elements of the status quo that are very difficult to work through and do pose some unique challenges for us. If I could summarize our challenges into one kind of concept, for me it would be air gaps and swivel chair. That's kind of the phrase for me that I kind of keep coming back to: air gaps and swivel chair. Air gaps are when I've got a couple systems there's a gap in between, and it takes a human to do a fat finger. Well, this looks like it's right over here in this grid, or there's a phase line here. Okay, I guess it about matches over here, and I draw it on a different system. So air gaps and swivel chairs to me are my greatest challenge in the mission command arena. That for me puts a battle captain, away from his or her job, or a battle staff NCO that really then buries them into what should be a very lean, agile system, kind of grinds to a halt when we deal with our air gaps and swivel chairs. So to expand upon that a little bit, for me, and I think for all of us, the network is a chain, and that's how I visualize it. It's a chain that connects all the echelons together, and every link in that is important, and it must be a resilient, robust, and connected chain all the way through, from the highest echelon to the lowest echelon, for this to work. And I agree with, I think it was Denise or maybe Marcus said earlier, it's not really an upper TI, lower TI kind of conversation. It's some elements use services more than others. Other elements use more of the PLI, positional location information, the voice, graphics, small unit files. So different elements of the chain use different parts of the network, but it's a very symbiotic relationship where some it's very critical, feeds information down, and some very critical to feed information back up the chain. But it must be a very robust chain. And some worry that it's about me wanting to be squad leader 6, me wanting to be the one to look at a squad leader and say, no, move out to go to the other tree, not that tree, and get in someone's business for it. But I clearly contend it's not the case. For me, nirvana is when we can all clearly see in real time the shape of the battle. Is it going to plan, or is it not going to plan? Are we on pace, or are we off pace? Are we at a decision point that causes us to make a decision, or are we not? Do I need to dynamically retask someone, and can I do that in a timely manner? That's to me that nirvana desired end state. I can do that rapidly up and down the chain seamlessly. We're all seeing the same thing. We can make decisions with confidence and move out aggressively. But this starts to fall apart when that chain, and I would extend all the way down to platoon, maybe squad level. When that chain starts to break at any level there, the whole engine starts to wobble. It starts to, a couple cylinders aren't firing there, and the whole machine starts to shudder a little bit. And so that's, I think, where we are spending a lot of our time, is trying to figure out these gaps in the chain, these breaks in the chain, and how do we plug those gaps. As I mentioned a little bit about what that looks like, where we're looking at maps, we're looking at data. I think one big element that causes this is that PLI, that position location information, not populating. A lot of it was we did, in my judgment, we built a lot of our systems. We did build it based on somewhat of a FOB-centric operational environment, sustainment operations environment, where we have a fairly robust infrastructure we're falling in on. It tends to be a very mounted-centric environment where vehicles play a fairly important role in the connective tissue of backhauling information and forward pushing information. But that starts to break apart when all of us, I'm with an infantry brigade combat team, so we're primarily dismounted, but all of us are clearly operating that spectrum and operate with that technique. And so as we separate from the vehicles more, then it starts to really break down, especially as we look at the contemporary operating environment. We look at the mountains of North Korea. We look at other places we may be involved with. I firmly believe in the Chief of Staff of the Army's vision for future combat, where it is a very dirty environment, very austere environment, weeks on end without having access to our support mechanisms, our ground vehicle convoys. Indeed, when we looked at a lot of our war simulations, we were looking at many air assault maneuvers deep with the enemy, and we found ourselves operating without connection to our ground supply for multiple days at a time. So, and with that comes a lack of connection to those backhaul platforms that help us with our mission command platforms. And I do think that impacts how we train. Many times we do train where that ground convoy gets to us fairly quickly, and I've got these robust vehicles that otherwise I cannot lift for the helicopter. I can't really lift anywhere else, but that ground assault convoy comes in fairly early, and I would challenge that assumption. I think there's going to be many again days and weeks where we would not have that, and so how do we make that chain work? Because again, I go back to the problem, what that ends up looking like, and we have when I don't have the PLI populating, I have the analog map that really should be that backup in case I need it, in case the lights go out, becomes the primary. The vast majority of us now are using that as the primary, and then I'm looking off of that and then fat fingering over to the screen to make sure I'm feeding into the network and making that engine run well. But that's that human in the middle. That's really kind of working the judgment on where that line is, and now I'm having to call the battalions again to clear fires to make sure we're keeping that updated. Again, a lot of that's on us, our own internal systems and processes, and how we train, how we manage it. But when I'm trying to do both at the same time, that's when I'm doing neither one that well. And so that's really, I think, where a lot of us are really trying to work through this. And the result then becomes we become slower than we should be. We confuse ourselves more than we should. We start to look at what's the current version of the truth. Is that map up on the wall with the pins on it true, or is this screen true? Which one is the most accurate? Well, this one's about 3 hours old, this one's about 2 hours old, and we're trying to reconcile the two. So that's what happens when we have those gaps and swivel chairs that get inserted into the system, and that whole chain isn't highlighted and isn't robust all the way through. So that's, I think, for me, as I look through this and try to capture the problem we face, that's probably the greatest one that I would have. And solution sets, there's maybe we can talk through, and if it's a resiliency and the robustness of a terrestrial-based comms or a celestial-based comms, either one. But for me, that's key for me is trying to figure out how we can make that network light up, stay resilient, stay connected all the way through from that squad or platoon level all the way back up through brigade to division to corps, so that it's a seamless, symbiotic relationship there. There is some good news in this. We have folks who are really again getting after this. We do have folks who are working behind this convergence of trying to make it happen. It's not good that we all look very different. One of the feedback comments from the CTCs is that each battalion, division, each battalion and brigade that comes through ends up looking a little different because we're all trying to work different solutions to bridge those gaps. But the good news is we have very adaptive and innovative soldiers out there. Some leaders really trying to work through to push forward, and they're very receptive to innovative ideas and new ways of doing business. And so it's a very they're soaking that in when we can provide them with very innovative solutions. We are working amongst mostly digital natives. Most of the company commanders now are, I would consider, digital native. They were born in probably 1990-ish as the company commanders now. So they've grown up with email. They've grown up with devices. They're very comfortable with it. Certainly the soldiers are. So it's there's some good news behind all this. There's some silver linings behind these clouds here. We're taking full advantage of that, and we are. Again, I think the pump is very well primed for this kind of dialogue here that we're having with industry. These changes the Army's making with how we fold this in. There's again definitely a very hungry, thirsty Army ready to fold that in. So certainly prepared to answer any questions going forward from here. Thank you.
Thanks, Derek. So next, before I make the next introduction, I want to say we'll have time for questions. We'll have about 15 minutes, so please prime the pump for those questions. I'll turn it over to Joe Howard, who manages tactical solutions for the U.S. Army from Hewlett Packard, in his role as an enterprise account manager. And, sir, similar to the question I asked General Smith, in addition to your comments, challenges in policy and governance that you think are barriers to providing solutions to our soldiers. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Colonel. So what I'd like to do in the process of answering your question is give a little backward-looking historical perspective from my experiences and then some forward-looking comments. So I first started supporting the Army as a vendor and as an engineer in the early 90s, but primarily focusing on post camps and stations, starting out with a program called CUTN, which evolved into I3MP, and traveled the world, lots of post camps and stations, and so I saw the things that could go well, and I saw the things that could go not so well. Now, that's from an enterprise, a post camp and station environment. So about 7 years ago, my boss said, we've got to diversify. We can't just rely on this enterprise business, lots of competition, et cetera, et cetera. So, start figuring out how to support the tactical environment. So I had a meeting with Colonel Chuck Hoppy, who was the WIN-T PM at the time, and he started explaining his environment to us, and he was kind enough and maybe intuitive enough to figure out that we were actually sincere and we were real guys and we weren't just there trying to sell him something. And so he took the time to explain the tactical environment and what was important to him. He encouraged us to focus on size, weight, and power, environmentals, to get outside of the box, to think about the operator, to think about the environment. And it was a very different way of thinking. And frankly, it scared me a little bit because I knew how fragile IP networks could be. Now, it doesn't mean they have to be, but they could be. So I do have to give the program and the people in the field and General Dynamics, as one example, a lot of credit for making what can be pretty fragile technology work in a very difficult environment. I've had operators come back from the field, from being deployed, and say, you've got to make this easier for me. We don't get trained on everything. We're figuring stuff out on the fly. We have people spending too much time at the keyboard trying to configure a network when that's not even really their job. And I think that's a lot of what these initiatives going on right now are all about. I'm really impressed with this event today and yesterday afternoon, and I'm really impressed and encouraged by the leadership and the initiatives and the new thinking and the recognition that we need to go faster, we need to go quicker, we need to innovate, we need to fail fast and do new things. So when I look at policy and governance, I think of that in the perspective of new things that we can do, because the good news from an industry perspective, I believe, is that the end state that's been outlined quite well by a number of the speakers, I think for the most part is very, very achievable over the course of the next couple of years. The ability to simplify, to automate, to make the networks more resilient, to make them much more secure than they are right now. That's all very doable with new technologies. We heard a little bit of a description of software-defined networking earlier, but that's just one example. There's orchestration technologies, there's automation technologies. We want that complexity, as General Mingus articulated, we want that complexity in the back end, and we want the operators to be able to, as simple as one button, configure a network and be viable and effective and beyond to more important things. But governance and policy affect a great deal automation, because if I'm going to automate something, there's going to have to be a policy behind it. What are the privileges that these individuals have? What can they do and not do? If I'm going to reconfigure a network, what's the policy for reconfiguring a network? If there's a cyber attack, what's the policy? Do I shut down? Do I default to fresh assets? Do I do new virtualized builds? And so the policy part is the hardest part, and policy guides solutions. Policy is going to very much, I believe, guide how we provide these new tools. And from an industry point of view, I know a lot of times we get into these issues about, well, what's the policy? Can we do this? Can we not do this? And it's challenging. So a lot of it's experimenting. A lot of it's coming back with ideas in an iterative process with leadership that I think is going to be very helpful. The other area as a vendor from a policy and government perspective that somebody like me worries about is from an acquisition point of view. When I see a set of requirements, I'm trying to figure out, is there a policy behind this? Is there, do I have a chance to play? Do I have a product that will work? If I have a product that will work, is it on approved products list, or does it have a con, or does it have an ATO, or if not, how can I get one? I look at the acquisition strategy. Is it LPTA? Is it Best Buy? Is it maybe right now an OTA? And so policy guides acquisition and issues that absolutely affect the vendors in terms of can I play? Do I want to play? Or are there things that I can do quickly so that I can have an opportunity to participate and presumably provide a great and maybe best solution for the government. So that's from an industry perspective. I have on both my technology hat and my acquisition hat, and it's embedded very deeply in that.
Thank you, sir. So let me see. Are there any questions out there? Please raise your hand if you have a question. All right, General Komar, please. Here comes the mic.
Yeah, no, hey, I appreciate all the panel members and their insights. Just a couple, really one question, and this is really for Jeff and Joe, is I want to pull the string a little bit on how we can better communicate between the Army and industry. Now, obviously, this forum here is very focused. I've got to oversee all the requirements from the Army. Whether you do uniforms to helicopters, trucks to battlefield pain management. So what we've done at ARCIC is we've developed what we call is the Capabilities Information Exchange. And what we do is we announce we put it out in FedBiz Ops. We do an announcement to say, hey, we're going to, on this date, we're going to identify and discuss what our capability gaps are, and we do it in a classified form. And then about 6 months later, we have industry come back to us. And again, it's one-on-one, so nobody has to worry about intellectual property, and we protect that. And that really is one of the ways that we help do that and share that. The other criticism that we've had in the past is it's too hard for the little guy to get access to the government. Now, obviously, neither of you represent the little guy out there. So twice a year at the AUSA forums, we have what we call the FIND. And like every good Army program, you start with the acronym and then backward engineer. And what that is that's the Forum for Innovative and Novel Discovery. And we do the same thing. We put out in FedBiz Ops. There's typically a very focused issue. In fact, we did a network a couple weeks ago down in Huntsville. And just like with the big guys for the CIE, they submit white papers and we down select from that and have them come in one-on-one and present their ideas. Now, previously we didn't have any money associated with that. I think we're going to be able to change that in the future, but we are able to hook them up and link them up with the appropriate lab or whatever. So my question is that something that you two believe is useful from your industry perspective? And if not, what are some of the other ways in which we can get after that?
If you could limit your answers to 2 minutes each. Thank you.
Yeah, I will comment in a couple of ways. One, I think that's a great way to get at part of it. I think the more often you can do that and align it to the strategy and to the implementation plan so that we can see the linkages, I think would help us come better prepared for that discussion, dialogue, and presentation of capabilities. I think another aspect of that would be what's the follow-up. So we come and we talk about it, we demonstrate, but is there a follow-up? A follow-up, it can be something very simple like, thank you very much, but we're not interested, and then we'll move on and do something differently. But there has to be follow-up, and the confidence and trust has to be there that there's going to be follow-up as we move forward. So that would be my opening comment to your.
Yeah, and my very simple comments would be for technologies and companies that seem credible, have an open door and an open mind in the beginning of the process. And if those people and companies don't prove to be of any value, then as General Smith mentioned, people can go do something else. But what I see and what concerns me is there's a set group of vendors and technologies that people are very comfortable with, and they like dealing with those. And getting outside of that comfort zone can be very difficult. Not necessarily at the leadership level, but when you start going down one layer below, people are in their comfort zones and they don't really want to change, and they have their buddies. So that would be number one. On terms of the capability info exchange, General, my only comment would be a lot of the best technical people are not cleared, and they're probably mostly clearable, but just getting a clearance right now isn't the easiest thing to do. And if there was a way to vet people without having a clearance so they could get in and have an open dialogue with you, that would probably get you a higher caliber in general.
Thank you. Any other questions? And while we're looking, a question for you, sir, General Martin. Dovetailing off of what Derek said, confidence in the PLI, given the speed of the network and technology, how confident are you today in the PLI that you see, and how does that impact how you execute your battle order?
So I've got to harken back to my experience at the National Training Center at Fort Irwin to truly be able to, I was the CG out there before I went to First ID, and to watch the brigades lose confidence in their PLI and lose confidence in the system and revert to rudimentary, less optimal procedures to clear fires, less optimal procedures to conduct coordination, less optimal procedures to establish a common operating picture. It all comes into play. And so in a constructive environment or warfighter, I was pretty confident with the PLI, but that was a brigade and above mission command network that was fed by a SIM that was built based on a fiber network, the SIM itself. And so there was a certain amount of confidence with that. But even with that, there were times when, and this is what I described previously, where it took a lot of maintenance to keep our network up. Our G6 had to, the old salt in the engine room, listen to things, and hey, we got some latency in our PLI. We've got to turn off some services so that we can expedite the processing of that information, so that what we look at on our COP is straight. When we were doing a deep attack, that was critical that we had a good picture of the enemy, and we had a good picture of our assets that were in the OE and the assets we're going to introduce in the OE to shape the fight forward of the brigades. And so PLI confidence is something that we've got to work on. It can be better because when you throw a division with no kidding 3 to 6 brigades below it, and you talk about the amount of information that's going to be flowing through that network, you got to ask yourself the question: will the network be able to pass that information so that the command posts at echelon can see the same thing? And I would tell you, based on my experiences, it depends.
So it gets to throughput and speed of the network. Oh, thank you, sir. Any questions? Any more questions? Kristen?
What about in the near-peer fight, though? Confidence in the PLI in a near-peer environment?
Well, that's exactly where I'm going with this, because as I watched brigades fight at the NTC, it was in a decisive action training environment with a near-peer threat, and they had to know exactly where all of their resources were, and they had an enemy that was unpredictable, uncooperative, and very aggressive. And so if you don't have good PLI for your own formation, and it's also the intelligence that you're passing on the enemy. I'm going to forget the doggone name of the stacks that support D6A, But at echelon, battalion and above, you've got these stacks. But here's the fact. In my 17 or 18 rotations as a commanding general at the NTC, I never saw those server stacks pass the tactical entity database down to the battalion level consistently across the board. And it wasn't because there were bad people. It's because they overheated or they overtaxed the satellite networks that they were relying upon to pass information if they could not establish the high-capacity line of sight capability and establish that network with the terrain and all the intervening terrain features that existed out at Fort Irwin. It's as Mike Lundy would say, a wicked problem. And so in a near-peer fight, it's even more important. And it's not just where you're at. We've got some incredible ISR capabilities, and we've got joint and coalition eyes out there that if we have that intelligence network lashed together, it's speaking, and the databases are updated, that's really where you unleash the true power of our mission command networks to provide us a decisive edge over most, if not all, of our adversaries.
Thank you, sir. Any other questions? There's one. Go ahead.
I used to be a requirements guy for the Marine Corps, and I know when we have threshold requirements and we have objective requirements, and oftentimes all the really hard things end up being objectives because they're hard, right? And it's easier for us to go to industry and get those threshold things when they're kind of dumbed down. What I think I've heard here is the challenge is all in those objective requirements that we don't often fund. And what we hear from industry, commercial industry, is out there solving problems to solve their own problems. Like I work for Viasat, they build in anti-jam capabilities in their satellites because it's business. You know, we've got to protect bandwidth because that's money. And then there's companies like Trellisware who have designed new waveforms and things to work better. And so getting those kind of technologies inserted has always been the challenge we've had. When are we going to raise the bar on the requirements and say these are threshold requirements where you have what's possible? You know, when you say, hey, 100 meg is possible down to your battalion, it is if we design the requirement right. But when we dumb down the requirements, we end up getting a less than optimal solution, and then we put our warfighters on the operational end at risk because you're having a swivel chair and you're having no confidence in your PLI and having to come up with manual ways to do your business. I really do think it gets back to how the requirements are vetted and streamlined, and we should stand a firm line on the threshold. Push industry to deliver for you because they're out there building these capabilities that can meet those specs.
I don't think that's a question that this panel can answer. I think it's certainly one that I've seen that you're welcome, sir, that can advocate for, absolutely, but it's the Mission Command and the Cyber Center that needs to take that on, and absolutely the CFT when they see what is in the art of the possible. I think there's time for one more question, so I'll ask it, and this is for Derek. You're not getting off easy. Is today's PACE plan, the PACE plan that your SIGOs and signal personnel execute, is it sufficient to enable Mission Command?
It's sufficient because we're going to make it work, but it's not ideal. We and to the general's point, we our big challenge is I'm trying to get away from analog as the P. My challenge to my folks is we've got to make the digital work, especially with the JBCP and other systems that we know we can have some confidence at a lower level to get the PLI to manage a COP and how we communicate. But I think my challenge is that the P and the A start to blend together. And so when they start to go back and forth, now it's no longer a primary and alternate. Again, I go back to what I said before, I'm doing two simultaneous and trying to do both well instead of one as a primary and one as truly a backup. So it's sufficient in that we will make it work and we will not let the mission fail. But we definitely put ourselves at a bind, and we slow ourselves down. We insert risks into the process when we are not able to execute with a little bit more aggressiveness, a little bit more speed.
Thank you. I want to thank the panel across the panel, over 20 deployments. Great insight. We'll be here until the questions end on in the social hour. So I'll turn it over to Mike. Again, thanks for your time.
Okay.